This is a narrative adaptation of the provided episode, fully expanded and presented as a complete, single prose story. Per your strict formatting guidelines, all numerical values are spelled out entirely in Vietnamese words. No shorthand, numbers, icons, or special formatting symbols are included, and the story text itself remains strictly in the English language. The sun was dipping low over the horizon, casting long, golden streaks across the water as Philip Carlyle made his final preparations. Beside him, Molly looked at him with a mixture of quiet skepticism and routine affection. When she asked if he was truly heading out to Catalina that very evening, Philip offered a cool, composed nod. He had mentioned it the day before, though she admitted she had not realized he meant it so definitely. She had entertained the idea of having dinner together at the club come Saturday, but Philip simply promised to call her ship to shore before bidding her goodbye and urging her to have fun while he was away. A short time later, Philip stepped into the warmth of his private club. The bartender greeted him politely, asking if he would like his usual scotch and inquiring about his evening plans. Philip confirmed he was sailing out to Catalina, prompting the bartender to remark on how strange it was that he had traveled as far as Hong Kong on a package tour yet had never visited Catalina, despite it sitting merely 34 miles off the coast. Their brief exchange was interrupted when the bartender announced a phone call for Philip. Stepping over to the receiver, Philip answered to find Mike Hartney on the other end. Philip instructed Mike to meet him at the boat immediately and emphasized that he must not let anyone see him or tell a soul. When Mike asked about the reason for all the secrecy, Philip promised to explain everything once they met in person. Passing George, the night attendant who joked about a sailor being a beast of burden except when at sea, Philip walked out toward the docks. Down at the slip, Mike arrived through the shadows, stepping quietly aboard the vessel. He assured Philip that no one had seen him and asked what the arrangement was. Philip laid out the plan. Mike would take the boat out to Catalina alone tonight, and Philip would fly over the next day to meet him. Knowing Philip's wife could be demanding, Mike assumed it was a clever cover for a marital escape and agreed. Philip handed over the keys, telling Mike they would return together on Monday, and wished him well before stepping back onto the dry dock. Days passed before the mystery began to unfurl in the office of Barnaby Jones. Julie Barton sat across from the seasoned detective, her fingers nervously twisting together as she confessed to losing her boyfriend. She admitted that saying it aloud made her feel like a hysterical high school girl, but Barnaby gently reassured her, noting that a human being was a very important thing to lose, and asked if she had reported the matter to the police. Julie explained that she had debated what to do all week. At that moment, Barnaby's daughter-in-law and secretary, Betty, walked into the room carrying a tray with a glass of milk, custom-made with 1 sugar and a splash of cream just as Julie liked it. As Julie handed back a small photograph she had dropped on the desk, Betty observed that the young man in the picture was certainly very attractive, to which Julie wistfully replied that he merely needed a bit more practical sense. Resuming her account, Julie explained that her boyfriend, Mike Hartney, had completely disappeared. While he often went away for long stretches to crew on boats during races down to Ensenada or Transpac, this time was different. He had not signed on to any crew, and she knew the real reason he was hiding, a bad check for $600. Barnaby remarked that passing bad paper was hardly a sterling characteristic, but Julie passionately defended Mike, explaining it was the only time he had ever done anything like that, and he had fully expected to cover it. What Mike did not know was that Julie's parents had unexpectedly sent her $500 for her birthday, allowing her to cover the draft just in time. Though Barnaby reminded her that covering the debt did not entirely clear him, he saw the deep affection she held for the young man. Realizing she was desperate to let Mike know he was safe from prosecution, Barnaby agreed to look into the matter for her, taking down his address and sending her off with a reassuring smile. As Julie departed, Betty questioned why they were taking on a case of a missing boyfriend who passed bad checks, but Barnaby simply asked where else the poor girl could possibly turn. Meanwhile, local broadcasts were reporting grave news across the coastline. The Coast Guard had officially called off its search for the millionaire sportsman Philip Carlyle. Authorities declared that his body would likely never be recovered due to treacherous ocean currents and clear evidence of blue shark activity in the area. Far away from the ocean breezes of Southern California, in a quiet bank branch in Yuma, Arizona, a man stepped up to the teller window identifying himself as Fred A. Williams. The branch manager, Eugene Adams, came out to greet him warmly, expressing his pleasure at meeting a client who usually banked exclusively by mail. Shortly thereafter, the man now calling himself Fred Williams was lounging in a luxurious, secluded retreat alongside a striking woman named Diane Stewart. Dressed casually and reveling in their new freedom, they celebrated their fresh identity. Fred declared that he felt like a whole new man getting a second chance at life. They drank, laughed, and embraced the thrill of their newly acquired wealth. Fred reassured Diane that the passports were completely authentic, obtained from the same reliable supplier who provided all their other false identification documents. As they sat back, Fred began to mock his past life, reflecting on how his wife of 20 years, Dorsey, had done nothing for the past decade except grow older and colder. He chuckled at the thought of what her father's face would look like the following month when he tried to figure out what happened to the trustee account Fred had systematically drained, or the shock Dorsey would feel when she realized he had milked all their personal assets dry. Diane was eager to use their new passports immediately, but Fred insisted they needed to lie low in their isolated cabin for 3 or 4 months until the heat died down, gradually getting used to being Mr. and Mrs. Fred A. Williams before traveling overseas to buy a villa in Europe. Back in Los Angeles, Barnaby Jones began tracing Mike Hartney's steps. His search led him to the elegant residence of Mrs. Philip Carlyle. As a servant set out wine, fruit, and cheese, Mrs. Carlyle explained that Mike and her late husband had been old drinking buddies, noting that Mike had a bit of talent as a painter and often did odd jobs for Phil. She looked at a specialized fruit slicing gadget on the table, remarking how Phil loved expensive gadgets, fast cars, and fancy boats, and lamenting where all those luxuries had ultimately brought him. Barnaby gently steered the conversation back to Mike, mentioning that he had been missing for 9 days. Mrs. Carlyle scoffed, saying Mike was always disappearing, either on sailing trips to Acapulco or Mazatlan, or off on Cloud 9 with his sexy girlfriend. When Barnaby brought up Julie Barton, Mrs. Carlyle corrected him, stating that the love of Mike's life was actually a knockout model named Diane Stewart. She gave Barnaby the name of Diane's residence at the Chatham Apartments on Doheny, recalling how she, Phil, Mike, and Diane used to be quite a tight 4-person group. Barnaby proceeded directly to the Chatham Apartments, only to find a lively young man named Billy Thompson in the middle of redecorating. Billy explained that Diane's lease had expired and he had taken over the space, leaving him clueless as to her current whereabouts or what to do with the clutter she had left behind. Billy even asked Barnaby for his opinion on paint swatches, trying to distinguish between powder blue and robin's egg blue. Realizing Diane was gone, Barnaby tracked down her veterinarian, knowing how devoted she was to her prized Persian cat named Cotton. At the clinic, the veterinarian confirmed that Diane had brought Cotton in for years, highly recommending their services, and mentioned that Cotton was currently staying at the facility for long-term boarding. Though the doctor could not disclose her new address due to client confidentiality, Barnaby noticed a local town newspaper on the waiting room table that dropped subtle clues about her recent movements. Barnaby traveled up to a tranquil mountain lake community where Diane and her new husband were hiding out. Stopping by a local tackle and supply shop, Barnaby spoke with a young storekeeper who casually mentioned that a glamorous woman matching Diane's description, now going by the name of Mrs. Fred A. Williams, had recently moved into the old Bentley house by the lake. The clerk noted how she bought vast quantities of high-end cosmetics, shampoos, and specialty creams, making her a memorable customer in the small town. Armed with this information, Barnaby made his way down toward the lake where Fred Williams was attempting to fish along the shore. Barnaby approached quietly, observing Fred's clumsy handling of his fly rod. Offering a friendly piece of advice, Barnaby demonstrated how to keep the wrists loose and align the thumb with the rod to achieve a proper cast. Fred introduced himself as Fred Williams, pointing up toward his cabin. Barnaby introduced himself in return and stated he was looking for a man named Michael Hartney, suggesting that Fred's wife might know him. Fred called out to Diane, who stepped out onto the porch. When Barnaby asked her about Mike, she maintained a cool demeanor, claiming she had not seen him in months and explaining that her recent marriage to Fred had kept her busy. Barnaby carefully examined Fred's fishing gear, admiring a split bamboo pole and a collection of hand-tied flies. One fly in particular caught Barnaby's sharp eye, a custom creation featuring unique painted beads for eyes. When Barnaby asked about it, Fred claimed he had tied and painted it himself, calling it a Lady Diab based on a traditional Lady Godiva pattern. Barnaby smiled, remarking how unusual it was for someone to learn the intricate art of tying specialized flies before learning basic fly casting, but he let the matter rest. He asked if he might borrow some extra ocean tackle from the porch later, and Fred agreed before Barnaby bade them a pleasant day. Inside the cabin, tension instantly flared between the couple. Diane panicked, calling her companion Phil, and expressing deep paranoia about Barnaby's visit. Philip snapped at her, ordering her never to call him Phil again and reminding her that his name was Fred. He insisted that Barnaby was merely a bank investigator looking into Mike's bad check and had no idea about their true identities. To get rid of the detective once and for all, Philip instructed Diane to make a drink, call a friend in Los Angeles, and pretend to uncover a rumor that Mike was working at a dry dock on a boat called the Getaway in Marina del Rey. When Barnaby returned to the cabin shortly after, Diane delivered the fabricated story about Mike working on the boat. Barnaby expressed gratitude for the tip and promised to head back, though he casually noted that he would take a rain check on borrowing the tackle. After Barnaby departed, Diane's anxiety reached a breaking point. She began packing her bags, insisting that they use their false passports to flee immediately. Philip grabbed her roughly, demanding to know how Barnaby could have traced her to this remote location. Panicked, Diane admitted that she had given the local mailing address to her cat's veterinarian in case of an emergency with Cotton. Enraged by her carelessness, Philip scolded her for putting their entire plan at risk. Determined to verify Barnaby's story, Philip forced Diane to call his former estate in Bel Air. Pretending to be Mrs. Barnaby Jones using a southern accent, Diane spoke with the housekeeper, asking if her husband had stopped by. The housekeeper confirmed that Mr. Jones had been at the Carlisle residence just the day before. The realization that Barnaby was actively investigating Philip Carlisle's disappearance sent a shockwave through the cabin. Realizing their cover was completely blown, Philip knew he had to act decisively. Barnaby, meanwhile, had already placed a call to check on Marina del Rey, discovering that no boat named the Getaway existed. Returning to the local general store, he spoke with the older proprietor, Al, while getting gas. The storekeeper remarked on how Mrs. Williams bought specialized cuts of meat and fancy fruit, yet noted with suspicion that in the 2 weeks the couple had been staying at the Bentley house, not a single soul in town had ever laid eyes on Mr. Williams himself. Armed with certainty, Barnaby returned to the cabin one last time. Stepping onto the porch, he found Philip alone, meticulously slicing fancy fruit with the exact same specialized kitchen gadget present at the Carlisle mansion in Bel Air. Barnaby stepped inside, noting the quiet vacuum in the house. When he asked where Diane was, Philip claimed she had gone for a walk on the hill wearing a cozy cashmere sweater. Barnaby looked around, spotting signs of a struggle and subtle details that did not add up. Philip suddenly pulled a gun, pointing it directly at the detective. Barnaby remained remarkably calm, pointing out the clear trail of evidence Philip had left behind, the handmade flies crafted by a missing man, the distinctive fruit slicer from Bel Air, and the sudden absence of Diane. Barnaby confronted Philip directly, stating that killing Diane must have been simple for him because he assumed no one would miss her except her cat, but killing a recognized detective would bring relentless police scrutiny. Philip ordered Barnaby against the wall at gunpoint, preparing to eliminate him and dispose of his body in the deep mountain lake. Before Philip could pull the trigger, the front door swung open as the local delivery boy arrived carrying a box of specialty cosmetic items for Mrs. Williams. Taking advantage of the sudden split-second distraction, Barnaby moved swiftly, disarming Philip and tackling him to the floor. Barnaby pinned the fugitive down, secured the weapon, and instructed the startled delivery boy to call the police immediately. With the truth laid bare, Philip Carlyle was taken into custody, exposing his elaborate scheme to fake his own death, murder Mike Hartney to steal his identity, embezzle millions from his family trusts, and eliminate anyone who threatened his escape. A few days later, Barnaby sat near the water with young Julie Barton. The sun was warm, and the coastal breeze carried the faint sound of gulls overhead. Barnaby gently explained the final details of the case to her, comforting her in her grief over Mike. Julie looked out toward the ocean, admitting that despite her youth, she felt awfully old after everything that had transpired. Barnaby offered her a warm, grandfatherly smile, reassuring her that time would heal her pain and that there would be brighter days and new love in her future. When he asked if she was ready to walk back inside, Julie softly declined, choosing to stay by the shore a little longer to watch the boats coming safely back to harbor.